I'm going to make the decision to pivot or persevere, I have to do it not from a place of feelings, but from a place of facts. I can't do it from a place of emotion. I have to do it with data to back that up, because if you rely on your feelings to make decisions, you're going to screw your life up in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. In other words, just don't be impulsive. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Shift Podcast. I'm Evan Weiland with my co-host Matt Ware. And today we're going to talk about a subject that every single entrepreneur has had to face. And that's the subject of pivot or persevere. Stay the course, continue down the path that you've decided to take, or look for an off-ramp, look for an exit. Matt, wouldn't it be nice if we had some kind of a rubric or a cheat sheet for just knowing when we should make the decision?
Yeah, it would be great to just know, like, there's this, answer these 5 questions and then you'll have the answer, right?
Check this box.
Yeah. And I wish, you frame it, you set it up this way, like pivot or persevere, like it's a very binary black and white decision. And ultimately the decision itself is, I suppose, but the process of arriving at the decision is complex. It's difficult. There's a lot of different factors depending on the person and the situation and all of those things. And so that's what we want to talk about today is kind of how do you walk through this idea of making the decision? Do I pivot? Do I persevere? And one of the things that I think is sort of foundational in just the decision-making process for this in the first place is understanding that success really is a product of time.
Totally.
It's more a product of time than it is anything else, right? Sure. Like if you're willing to stick with something long enough, in most cases, you can actually find at least some measure of success.
That's right.
And so there's a lot of other factors that can make a person successful, but consistency and time may be the biggest one. It's not the most fun one. It's not the most glamorous one, but it is the one that maybe can make the most difference and the most impact. And so for me, anytime that I'm faced with this decision, do I pivot? Do I persevere? Do I change course, change direction, tweak this thing, or do I just kind of dig in and stay on the path that I'm on? I always kind of hear my dad's voice in my head. My dad, ever since I was a little kid, always said, it takes years to become an overnight success. And, it's a great way of saying it, right? Because especially in this day and age, we see people who it seems like have success really overnight, right? Like these influencers, these social media people, like they just pop up out of nowhere and you're like, oh my gosh, how have I never heard of this person? They're so amazing. They've got millions of followers and all this reach and all these things. And we often don't see the months or years that went in behind the scenes for them to get to that point. Like they're making a splash now, but that wave has been coming for a long, long time.
Right. Yeah.
We just don't see it and we don't recognize it. And so sometimes there's that temptation to pivot when we do just need to persevere. I think sometimes we forget that just like with your money, your interest compounds. In your work, your consistency compounds.
Bingo.
Consistency compounds over time. And so the longer you stay in what you're doing, chances are the better you'll get at it and the more successful you'll become. Right. I hate to use the word patience because I'm not a patient person. And so it'd be very hypocritical for me to talk about it. It is. And authenticity was going to be one of our pillars. So I have no business talking about patience. And really, honestly, I don't know any leader or any entrepreneur who is a patient person. It's almost like those are mutually exclusive things. In fact, I love the great statement by Ambrose Bierce. He says that patience is a minor form of despair disguised as a virtue. And I love that idea because it discourages me to even have patience. So I want to coin a different phrase for that for the sake of this conversation. I'm going to use the phrase entrepreneurial endurance.
I love it. Endurance.
So that may be, just putting lipstick on a pig, but entrepreneurial endurance is something that I think we have to have.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word patience, but I do think that we have to have enough endurance in what we're doing that we at least give it a chance to be successful. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs pivot too soon. And if they were to persevere a little longer, they might have better success.
Well, we know that perseverance is really on a linear timeline. It really is about time. We can observe this in nature. A tree grows with the root system and the fruit system. In fact, the tree grows in 2 directions, right? You can think of it that way. Below the ground is where the real work is done, right? Where it's dingy and dark and wet and gross and smelly. You're not going to bear any fruit unless that's done first. And that's, again, dark and dingy and gross, but also it takes time. With no real visible proof that anything's happening. And that's the part that is the least fun, I think. So, Perseverance is about time, and it's about consistency and that compounding thing. And so I guess I could just emphasize that real progress happens below the surface.
And that's the part that, unfortunately, a lot of times we don't really want to do, or the work that we're okay doing initially in the entrepreneurial journey, but after a while that gets old fast, right?
And especially if you're an entrepreneur and you have people rooting for you and they're not seeing the success that you're striving for, that can be daunting. If you're in a relationship with someone who's kind of waiting for you to hit stride, and you're like, just give me another year, it might not work out. It's like, it's tough. It's a tough place to be. So again, do you pivot? Do you persevere? It's all about that waiting and not knowing. And still, you need a rubric to know that you're heading in the right direction, even without the proof.
I'll tell you a story about this and kind of how this played out. Actually, just last week, as of the time of this recording, I had someone reach out to me who I had actually reached out to over a year ago in our marketing agency. Of course, we do a lot of cold outreach and all those things. And so he responded to a message I had sent over a year ago saying, hey, I wasn't ready at the time. Now I'm ready to talk about, some marketing, some advertising. And his question was so interesting. He said, are you still in the game?
Nice.
And that caught my attention for a couple reasons. One, because there are a lot of people in the digital marketing space that don't stay in the game very long for this very reason. Right?
I used to own a marketing agency.
Right. Yeah, it's a very common refrain, right? And the reason why is this very thing, right? Like, do they persevere or do they pivot? And a lot of people, because it's not an easy business to be in over the long haul, they bail, they get out. And so it told me this guy's already had experience with people like that who don't stay in the game very long. But it also sort of highlighted this very thing of, had I not stayed in the game, I wouldn't have these opportunities coming to me. Right. It's only because I stayed in the game long enough that those seeds I planted, to go back to your tree illustration, right? The seeds I planted are now starting to produce fruit. And so there is something to be said for just letting success take the time that it's going to take.
I like that.
And realizing there are some things you just can't rush.
So I want to take a second just to encourage anyone listening. If you're trying to make a decision on whether to pivot or persevere, I would say default to persevere. Yeah. Would you say that, Matt?
Yeah.
Default to persevere.
I would.
Default to persevere. Stay the course until the data proves it.
Yeah. So I think that's what we would say is default to perseverance as just a starting point, because success is measured over time. And so I think that's the first thing, you asked if there's a rubric. Maybe the first rubric or the first piece of the rubric is to say, have I given it enough time?
Sure.
Because I really can't make a good decision unless I've done that. I think the next piece of that is really being able to ascertain, am I being led by the facts of this situation or by my feelings about the situation? Facts versus feelings. And I think if entrepreneurs were being honest, which is what we're trying to do on this podcast, we would have to admit that we may be more led and influenced by our feelings more often than we really care to admit. And entrepreneurs, I think, are sort of notorious for this, both on the positive and negative side, right? I mean, you have to have a certain rush of positive emotion to even get started on what you do. You got to have this excitement and this passion. You got the dreams, and you're pitching to your friends and family or your investors, like whatever it is. And so there is an emotional piece that you're sort of driven by. The shadow side of that is entrepreneurs can also be driven by the emotions of frustration and discouragement and beating their head against a wall because this thing isn't working. And so sometimes the temptation to pivot rather than persevere is coming from an emotionally led place, a feelings place rather than a facts place. I think oftentimes we just have to take a step back and realize our emotions in most cases are not trustworthy. Our emotions are temporary, and our emotions generally are going to lead us to take the fastest and easiest path, not necessarily the right and best path.
Feelings do push us toward what's easiest. I mean, that's just the way that we're wired.
Right.
If you look at the investment strategy, why is investing your money so hard? Right. I'll give you an example. This is not my example. This didn't happen to me. But imagine a guy, 40 years old,
my friend,
a buddy of mine, invested into a company that I won't say, but it starts with a T and ends with an A. Invested into this company through Robinhood. Put the money in, very next day, checking it, right? Stocks are kind of diving, kind of doing this thing, and it's all feelings at this point.
Right.
There's really no strategy.
Yep.
There's no perseverance. It's just feelings. You've got a couple options, right? When you're seeing the natural flow of your investment happen, right? You can stick it out and hope for the best, or you can pull your money. And we all know sort of the consequence of pulling the plug on an investment.
Yep.
You get nothing.
Yep.
There's no win. Or you can stay the course and you can kind of ride that wave of ups and downs of the stock market. But we know the power of compounding interest.
Right.
It's on your side. And really, it's time that's on your side.
Yep.
Because you're not going to get that compounding interest without time.
Right.
And so that's a great illustration of perseverance.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is letting the data drive that decision, let the facts drive that decision, not your feelings. And, we deal with this all the time in my marketing agency, where, we'll launch an ad campaign. And what's interesting is a lot of times the ads that I love, that we created, or even that the business owners love, are not necessarily the ones that perform the best. And so sometimes you have an ad like, well, this image is kind of, plain, and this video is not particularly exciting, but that's the one that gets all this traction, and the leads are coming in and all the things. And so you have to make this decision, right? Like, do I pull this ad because I just don't like it? Or do I keep this one going because the results are really there? And so I think it's a facts versus feeling kind of decision. Do I persevere or do I pivot? And am I making that decision based on the facts or based on my feelings?
It really is an emotional roller coaster for entrepreneurs. It almost seems like there's a cadence to this thing called entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah, I think there's actually a cycle. That we go through, right? There's sort of an entrepreneurial cycle that, it doesn't matter who you are or what your business is or what industry you're in. This kind of plays out, at a macro level for all entrepreneurs, where you start this cycle really with an uninformed optimism. Like you're excited, right? You're pumped up because you're going to start this thing. You're going to launch this company. Like, I filed my LLC. Like, I'm going for it, right? And the sky's the limit. And we're going to make this huge impact. We're going to change the world. And we're going to get rich. We're going to do all the things. And there's this uninformed optimism because you don't know what you don't know yet. You haven't experienced anything, right? All you have is an idea and a dream and hopefully a lot of hard work. But you really don't know what you're up against. It's an uninformed optimism. And inevitably, what happens over some period of time to every entrepreneur is you hit some challenges, you hit roadblocks, you hit obstacles that you can't seem to figure out how to get through or around or over or under or whatever. And so then your uninformed optimism becomes informed pessimism, right? like, okay, now I know this thing, like the rose-colored glasses have come off. Now I know this thing's going to be a lot harder, going to take a lot more work, a lot more time, a lot more investment. And that's when a lot of entrepreneurs decide to not persevere and pivot, right? I'm going to get out, I'm going to sell, I'm going to change products, change services, do something totally different or do something, a tweak of some kind. And I think that's actually unfortunate because the next part of the cycle, and I don't know what the percentage is of people who drop off here, but the next part of the cycle, if you're willing to push through, is you can actually get to informed optimism, right? Like if you can figure out how to overcome those challenges and get to the next level, then all of a sudden you can begin to have optimism again, not from a perspective of not knowing what you don't know, but I do know what I know now. And now I know how to overcome. Now I know how to employ these tactics and these strategies. I just think a lot of times people don't persevere to get to that point. And I wonder how many small businesses are littered on the side of the highway of this entrepreneurial cycle.
That's right. Yeah. What's interesting is that if we look at the data of how small businesses fail in the first few years, right? I bet it lines up with this cycle, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
It's something like this. So according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, approximately 20% of new businesses fail the first year of being open, 45% during the first 5 years, and 65% during the first 10 years. So like that year to 5 year mark, you're talking the majority. It's like people are getting slain out there. Right. And I really do think that this cycle of optimism and pessimism, it plays a big part in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It plays a real big part.
Well, and I think, again, that's why we've got to take a step back and say, if I'm going to make the decision to pivot or persevere, I have to do it not from a place of feelings, but from a place of facts. I can't do it from a place of emotion. I have to do it with data to back that up, because if you rely on your feelings to make decisions, you're going to screw your life up in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. In other words, just don't be impulsive.
Right.
Don't be impulsive.
Yeah. Well, and again, we open by saying, hey, this kind of applies to every area of life. And I think that's good advice just in general, right?
Yeah,
Don't
agreed.
be impulsive.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Good work. All right, Evan. So we've talked, so far, right? Like the title of the podcast is Pivot or Persevere. And we mostly have just talked about persevering. Like you mentioned a minute ago, that is our default, I think. And I would encourage our audience to say that should be your default as well. But there are times where pivoting really does make sense. Yep. There are times that pivoting is the right move. And, for me, I think the question that you have to ask, if you're contemplating that, like if you think this really could be the right decision, I think the question they ask is, what is the likelihood that this will work if I stay on this path?
It's a good framework.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's a guess, right? Like, nobody knows, but you're making an educated guess as an entrepreneur, as a leader. Okay, if I stay on this trajectory, if I continue to do the same things, invest the same time, invest the same resources over another 6 months, 12 months, whatever your time horizon is, if I do that, what is the likelihood that this thing works, that it is successful? And I think the best that you can project that out kind of gives you the answer, right? Like, if there's a good chance that if you just stick it out, this thing's going to turn a corner, then you probably want to persevere. But if you can say, not from an emotional perspective, but looking at the data, that no matter how long I stick this out, this thing is unlikely to turn, then I think that's when it may be time to make a pivot.
I think that intuition plays a pretty big part in this. Listening to your gut on making decisions. Your gut knows the facts, right? It's your subconscious, right? There's a gentleman that he's a serial entrepreneur. He owns SaaS companies. One of those is a company called Meet Alfred. It's like an outreach tool for LinkedIn. Yeah. And I saw an interview of him one time, and the gal that was interviewing him asked, how do you make decisions? And so this is a guy, first of all, that's exited, multiple businesses, all software companies. Sure. And he said, I only make decisions with my gut. I'm sure he has someone on the back end that can provide him some data, right? At some point in the decision-making process.
I would hope so.
Yeah. But he says, I make a decision with my gut. I may have an opportunity on the table and I don't feel good about it. I won't even look at the data, pursue it. Yeah. If I think that I shouldn't sell, I don't sell. If I feel like I should just sell, I go ahead and sell. If I think I should buy, I feel good about this, I'm going to go ahead and buy. He says he makes decisions with his gut and it's worked out really well for him. To be that confident in your gut feeling, I think you just have to have tons of experience. Again, this guy exited multiple companies. Sure. And he had that data sort of in his bones. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That experience in his bones.
I think intuition as a leader is a really important thing. In fact, John Maxwell talks about that, 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. And I quote John Maxwell all the time because he's one of the biggest influences around, leadership thinking. But he talks about the law of intuition as being one of the most important laws, one of the most important things that a leader has to have, but also one of the most difficult things to develop. Because from his perspective, and I think this is true, you can't teach someone to have intuition, right? Like you can't just put them through a class or, watch this webinar or, do this course or whatever, and now you'll have intuition. Intuition is a very difficult thing to develop. It takes time and it takes experience and sometimes making a lot of mistakes. But what he also says, and I think this is true, is that leaders will tend to be the most intuitive in the areas of their giftedness. And so, the guy that you're talking about, he's obviously very intuitive in that area because that's where he's gifted. And so he's had success in that. So I think intuition is an important thing. And even to differentiate between emotion and intuition, right? Because emotion is just how I feel in the moment, whereas intuition is a deeper gut thing that's probably been developed and honed over time.
I think to sum it up, over time, experience sharpens intuition.
So I like the way that you said that. Experience sharpens, deepens, develops over time, which really just brings us back full circle, right? To the first point that we were making, which is that success is a product of time.
Of time.
So you just got to give things enough time before you can make this decision. Do I pivot? Do I persevere? Again, you've also got to make sure, am I making this decision based on facts or based on feelings, right? And both matter, right? Like we're not saying people should be robots, but you do have to separate your emotions from the facts of the situation. And then, you got to develop the intuition, because there are times that you've got to make a pivot. And if you're scared to do it because you're so entrenched in persevering, that's a problem. But if you're scared to not do it, then that's a problem too. So, there's no one right answer for this. I think the history of business will tell us that there are people and there are businesses who were successful on both sides. They were successful by persevering and staying the course and staying true to what they originally set out to do. And there are also ones that are successful because they were willing to pivot and tweak and make course corrections along the way.
Countless stories.
Yeah. So there's no one right answer. I think this is a question that we're going to face over and over and over again. This is a continual cycle that we're in. Do I pivot or do I persevere? And we want you to know that we're cheering you on as you're making those decisions.
I hope that you found this episode encouraging, helpful. Please like, share, subscribe, drop a comment below, and we will see you on the next one.